R&B podcast with Russ and Blake and a guest. R&B podcast today. Yes, we're blessed. That's all. All right.
There it is.
Guys, for coming back to talk to us again. It's R&B podcast episode
53.
53.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Very quickly. I got to thank God for this opportunity to have this conversation. Thank God for bringing Russ here.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't on the episode last week. I know y'all missed him.
Missed a week due to a crazy travel schedule. And, you know, it was the first episode I missed. So I felt, kind of weird editing it and not being a part of it.
But we back.
Yeah.
We back with Russ and a special guest. And before I introduce our guests, we've talked about mental health before on this channel, but not very in depth and not exactly directly. So today we bring on Miss Darrina Bledsoe, who is a licensed
behavioral health professional.
Yes, but what is LAC?
LAC stands for a licensed associate counselor.
Licensed associate counselor. That's what I was looking for. And you work with my wife.
Yeah.
And
she's amazing.
You helped me recently with a situation with a friend of mine. And so I think it's very important that we all just increase our awareness as far as how important it is to manage and address our mental health. And Ms. Darrina is going to explain some resources that we might all be able to utilize. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm happy we finally made this work.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Yeah. And then so before we get into all the nitty gritty, let us know how you got into this profession.
I got into this profession because I was motivated to be in a leadership position. And so initially I was pursuing my doctorates in medicine, and I realized I just don't like touching people and I don't like blood. So, but really I ended up finding that I'm most motivated by understanding people's behaviors, right? And the why. Why would you choose to do that? Why would you decide to engage in a particular, behavior, make a decision in a type of way? So, went to school for clinical psychology, got my master's degree, stopped there, came back home to Arizona, and have been practicing since 2013.
Nice. And you were in Iowa?
Yes.
Yeah. Cold.
Very
welcome
cold.
Back to the Valley. Beautiful weather here.
No snow.
Yeah, that's cool. Russ also studied psychology.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Was yours a general psychology?
Yeah, I just got my bachelor degree in psychology.
Nice.
And it's a field I still like to study, even though I'm not part of school or anything like that. But I wonder with you, when you started being motivated to even get into psychology in that realm, like, do you feel like you got the way from something about yourself, or were you studying yourself, or did something happen that made you curious about why people are doing things?
So my thesis focused on military relationships. I'm a military kid, and I was really pushed towards that just to understand, how did my parents make it work? Right. Long distance relationship. He's deployed. There's no cell phones, right? No laptops. It's just the big old box computers at the time. And so my biggest thing was just understanding, how can they make it work? And a majority of people can't. So my thesis focused on identifying factors that can predict commitment in long distance versus geographically close relationships. Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah, that's something that in my head I'd never thought was like feasible for me. Obviously it's difficult for many reasons.
Look, if you're an hour away from me, it's long distance.
Right.
It's pretty challenging for most people nowadays. But I can't imagine how it was then, when you didn't have any electronics to connect with somebody, and then the idea of your partner being in war. Because that's what it was. My dad was deployed to Desert Storm. He fought for the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So when I was younger, when he was in Desert Storm, that was pretty challenging for us. Yeah. Especially mom being primarily a Spanish speaker in America, and he's gone. So, a lot of factors contributed to how I got into psychology and really sticking to it versus kind of bailing out. Nice.
I'm wondering, what were some of the strongest indicators or factors that people would have that would make a long distance relationship work? Like, what did you find in that?
Great question.
Yeah.
So we focused on 3 factors. It was satisfaction, alternatives, and investments. So the higher your satisfaction is, the higher your investments are, and the lower your alternatives are, the higher the likelihood of commitment is predicted in your relationship with that person. And so alternatives is interesting because alternatives can mean like alternative people, but it also includes alternative activities outside of your partner that you are not including them in, right? Yeah. So if I have high alternatives, I want to go to the gym and I'm not including my partner, that's considered something that might reduce the likelihood of me staying committed to my partner. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good way to kind of illustrate that, because I tell people all the time, if you do want to make these changes in your life, it's a lot easier if the rest of your family's on board and it's more of a group effort. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense of how that could translate into the success of somebody's relationship too. Yeah. And then, of course, relationships are very important in terms of our mental health. You know, relationships can be very toxic sometimes, and it's not easy to prioritize someone as much as you prioritize yourself. Some people haven't figured out how to prioritize themselves, and then so it's even more difficult to actually try to show someone unconditional love and be level-headed in your engagements with them. So with the patients that you see, what do you think is kind of a common factor that, you know, inhibits people from being able to operate in a healthy mental space like more frequently?
Gosh, what a loaded question. So are you saying what are some things that contribute to people being able to like maintain a healthy relationship?
Well, yeah, I think that right now mental health is such a buzzword, and I have had issues with mental health in the past. I think that the average person has at least some point in their life, right? So, you know, there has to be some consistency in what these people are experiencing for them to not be able to overcome these things on their own and needing to seek that help. And I'm sure a lot of your patients seem like they're in a cycle of some sort also, right? So, like, what is the contributing factor that's not really giving them the opportunity to break out of those cycles?
So I think my answer is like 2 parts. So one is understanding your manifestation of mental health and looking at the factors that can contribute to where you are and where you might be in the future with your own mental health.
Awareness.
And the other part is the awareness, right? Yeah. So oftentimes when I get started, I like to do this activity called the manifestations of mental health. And it's, you guys know the Venn diagram with the 3 circles, right, that overlap?
Well, yeah, I know Venn diagrams, but not this one that you're talking about with manifestations.
So that's how I start the activity. We do the Venn diagram. One circle says environment, the other one says biology, and on the bottom it says genetics. And those are the 3 factors that can contribute to somebody's mental health, right? And so it's important to acknowledge this because there's one part that's controllable, like our environment, the people that we're around, and then there's the other part that's out of our control, like our biology. Right. And that's somewhat controllable depending on what we drink, what we eat, et cetera, exercise. But the other part of biology can also be your gender. Right. That's not controlled. Your age. Right. Those are things that we just don't have control. Puberty. Right. All those things. And then genetics is your family history. Right. So if you have a family history of diabetes, right, something medical, chances are the likelihood of you experiencing diabetes is higher. Doesn't mean that you will. You're just more susceptible to it. And it's the same thing with mental health, too. So if you have, especially in the Black culture, depression is something that's very common. Depression is actually the leading condition for adults in America, and second's anxiety. Right. So if you have that in your family history, the likelihood of you experiencing it is just higher. Right. And so, you know, I know you mentioned that you have a history too. And one thing I'll say is that we all have a sprinkle of something. You know what I'm saying?
In our genetic lineage, like we have a sprinkle of some type of mental health disorder. And so awareness is key. Awareness is power. It can give us direction. Right. And sometimes I think the hardest thing about seeing a counselor is being able to put a label or a name to what your experience is, right? Defining it.
Yeah. It's easy to say, I know something's off, right? Something's wrong, right? I'm having issues in my relationship and I just don't know what to do about it, right? And working in therapy allows you to put the spotlight on yourself versus focusing on everything else around you, right? And so when you guys know this, when you hit a certain age and you're working and you have family and you have all these goals, all these things, we tend to take the spotlight off of self-care, right? Yeah. And we focus on the outer the exterior or external validation versus the internal.
Yeah. Yep. And that can quickly turn into something that's really detrimental to your overall health, your physical health, your mental health, your, the whole deal. And so prioritizing one piece can easily help benefit all those other realms as well. You just have to start somewhere. Right.
I'm wondering, like, is there a time where people could tell within themselves that they've healed some of the genetic factors of their process? Because maybe some people would be like, I don't want to have kids and I don't want to reproduce until I heal to the most extent I can my genetic problems. Is that possible?
I think now we're playing fortune teller when we say things like, if I don't do it now, then my future is already negatively impacted, right? The assumption is if you don't treat it, then it can lead to worsening symptoms or outcomes for you. But certainly, our health is very important. You should spend time addressing it and just understanding more about how you function, right? And I think the biggest thing is our health changes over time, right? A year ago, we may have been in the best shape of our life, and then an accident happens, and now we have to essentially grieve the loss of that life that we had and begin the process of re-identifying who we are. And that can be really, really heavy. It can be very challenging.
Yeah, it requires coping skills. And
all that. Coping
can be very difficult. We have to cope with things regularly in our lives because things are always happening and
all the time.
Sometimes it can feel like a snowball effect of bad things going on, but we were just talking about the power of having the proper mindset and intentions when you're going into certain situations. And I think that a lot of us have the ability to stop that snowball, but the worse that you're feeling about yourself, the easier it is to make poor decisions around what you're doing and how you're treating yourself and how you're spending your time. So I definitely understand people getting in these situations where it doesn't seem like they can catch a break, and you really start feeling like the world is working against you. But when it comes down to it, we always have an opportunity to take some level of control. And I think that the majority of that starts with the awareness and putting forth the effort and getting the help if you need it.
One thing I think is really interesting is when you talk about the Black culture specifically, some people may not know the actual diagnosis that their ancestors may have, but they know there's this general idea of something had to be sad or depressing or traumatic in their history. So I'm wondering, how could you go about helping someone define possible generational trauma if they don't know specifically what it was?
I think there is a lot of discomfort in the unknown. And I think oftentimes we have to focus on, there's this concept called radical acceptance, right? And you can accept something, but when you radically accept it, it allows you to keep moving in a direction, right? And who knows what direction that is, right? That's the concept of radical acceptance. Is it doesn't matter which direction you're going, you're just moving. Right? Yeah. And so I think with generational trauma, that's a big thing, especially in Black culture. Black History Month, what's up?
Right.
Come on now. Come on now.
It's true.
Come on now.
Thank you.
And so, and we hear it all the time, right? Passing down stories from generation to generation to generation. And so one thing I always encourage is do your best to connect with your family, right? Have those hard conversations. If that has been cut, start doing research, right? There's stories out there, and sometimes we just have to take the steps to educating ourselves by putting ourselves in that uncomfortable situation or uncomfortable position and Googling, what happened in Arizona in 1820, right? What was happening here at that time? Or if your family history like mine is in Spain, right? I don't have any Black culture out there. With my dad's family, our family history ends at my great grandmother, and it's just because we don't have anything additional from that point. But we did I can say my family did a great job of providing us some type of historical literature to try to be aware of what Black history was at that time in Indianapolis, right? Yeah, so those are my roots. But oftentimes that's what I encourage. Just try to do the research, talk to your family, ask those hard questions, because chances are it's never been discussed,
Yeah.
right? But once you ask, there's a lot of fear in just having the conversation because we have the worst case scenario in our head, right? If I ask my parents, hey, can we talk a little bit more about race and the trauma that's happened in our family? The ideas that we create in our head is this is going to be a problem. We're going to start arguing because this is what's happened in the past. And oftentimes as we grow older and we start putting ourselves in those situations, our older parents are more open to having these conversations because now we're adults, right? And now we want to have the conversations. Now we have the skills to manage the stress that comes from these hard talks.
Man, feels like you've been following me or something. I feel like just recently I've been experiencing that. I told my dad just last week that, and he didn't realize this, so it was important for me to tell him, like, there was a point in my life where I couldn't have certain conversations with you because I would get too defensive and I wouldn't really accept the fact that you just want what's best for me and you're trying to be honest and watch out for me. And so I told him I appreciated that, and I would like for him to understand that all those things that I didn't listen to, I still remember them and they still meant something. And now I'm actively trying to put them into practice. And now I'm open door for anything you're trying to offer me because I understand how important it is. You talk about having a father in the home, and you have to allow the father to be a father as well. So it's very easy for youth, especially young men, to resist that love because it's difficult to understand, and we don't always show it towards each other as men. And so it might not even be shown the way that we would prefer or expect, but the acceptance of it needs to be there nonetheless, and the understanding, the awareness. And I really never thought about the importance of lineage and mental health. I think that was an important key takeaway there that people need to understand also. Yeah.
So what is to you the mental health crisis? I hear this a lot. People say we're in a mental health crisis. What do you think that even means?
I mean, so my therapist's mind goes crisis, which means danger to self, danger to others, right? And so I think what the crisis is the fact that it has been a trend since COVID, right? And I don't even like saying trend. It's been, people are more open and willing to reach out for help and also just say, yeah, I've been struggling too. I've been suffering in silence and I don't want to be silent anymore. So I really think what the mental health crisis is right now is the fact that so many people are reaching out and there are just not enough therapists.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So the demand is high, supply is low. And I've been saying this since like 2013 when I started practicing, because I felt the pressure as a therapist of having to manage so many people at once, right? And that number has only increased. So the CDC states that 1 in 5 adults meet criteria for a mental health condition. And it's actually trending upward where we're seeing about 2 of 5 adults, right? So that's 2 of 5 in your family, right? 2 of 5 of your friends, right? 2 of 5 people in the grocery store, just people that you're coming across, right? And so the number is going up because people are reporting it, and it's a crisis because over than 50% of people are untreated, right? And so you have a lot of people who know that they are feeling broken and lost and confused and uncertain of what to do, and then they're trying to figure it out by themselves. Because the stereotypes, the stigmas, right? The lack of availability of therapists, the difficulties of finding a therapist and navigating healthcare. If you don't have insurance, how you gonna pay $250 per session? Yeah. Right? To treat your trauma.
Right. And you probably need a lot of sessions. I mean, how many sessions do you think someone would need to go through before they could? That's individual.
That's an even loaded question, right?
You would have no idea. That just all depends on the person.
First response is, what's your insurance willing to authorize?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not, that's the toughest part when it comes to the first step of getting the help is how are you going to pay for the help? Are you going to use your insurance? Or are you paying out of pocket? If you're going to use your insurance, how much days or sessions is your insurance willing to cover?
Could you benefit from one session? Like I saw my therapist once and never went back, and like my life is kind of helps open your eyes to some things. Right?
It just depends. You know, I've worked with plenty of people who've come and they've probably done maybe 2 or 3 sessions with me, and it was just the mere opportunity to feel heard. Right? Feel validated and also reassured that, you know, and I don't like saying this, but I hear patients and clients say this to me all the time. Am I crazy? You're asking me if I think you're crazy. First off, I don't use that word, right? Unless it's Beyonce Crazy in Love. Okay. But I don't use that word because there's such a negative connotation attached to crazy, right? And it's like, no, you are not suffering from a mental illness, right? You have mental health issues, which you are capable of managing and addressing by learning particular techniques, by understanding yourself, your symptoms, and how you function in the world, right? It's levels to this, you know? Nice. And so, and oftentimes it's having a session, validation, right? Here's some resources, here's some tools. And then I've had some folks, they come back maybe a month or 2 later. You know, hey, I've used these things. Thank you for the information about sleep, right? I've been able to get sleep that's helped me a lot with my symptoms, right? And so, you know, once it just depends on the person, and what their goal is.
Tools and resources, very important, because a lot of people want help and they don't know where to start. So how would I navigate this system if I was feeling depressed and I wanted to do something about it right now?
So what I would encourage is start with your primary care doctor. Okay. And this is because the company that I'm a part of, EvolvedMD, we specifically have therapists in primary care offices. So we make accessing therapists accessible. We also make it affordable too. Because whatever you pay to see your PCP is what you would pay to see our therapist instead of paying a specialty code. So that's one step that you can take is connect with your PCP and have a conversation, schedule a mental health checkup, and they'll be able to give you resources, especially if they're a part of EvolvedMD. The other step that you can take is you can contact your insurance company. They'll give you a list of in-network therapists who can work with you. You can go to Psychology Today. I mean, there's quite a bit of resources online, and I can give you guys some names too. If you're in Arizona in the Valley, my sister is accepting clients as well. She is a BIPOC provider, BIPOC, Black and Indigenous people of color therapist.
Oh, nice.
And she specializes in trauma therapy. Darrina Bledsoe. Make sure y'all look her up.
And she's independent?
No, she's at the associate level. She works for a private practice where they do have independent clinicians that she collaborates with.
Nice.
So that's the nice thing is once you get in with a therapist, it's not just one therapist that you're working with. Oftentimes there is a team of clinicians who are collaborating, right?
Yeah, collaboration is key.
For sure.
Yeah, one person can't do it.
No.
I'm wondering, because you were saying that 50% of people or more are walking around like undiagnosed with mental health problems. And why do you think those people only figure out that they have a problem once they've gone into some type of crisis or depression? I don't even understand how people would know that they have a problem.
Well, usually something happens. Like it takes something happening for people to acknowledge this is an issue and I have to figure out how to make this change. It has to stop, you know? So classic example that will typically drive people to therapy is a loss, right? Loss of a loved one, because that is socially acceptable. Right? You lose somebody and you go talk to somebody about that loss, right? But then there's kind of the one-off. So research also shows that mostly women seek out support because women typically go to healthcare professionals more frequently than men, right? Plus, we have a higher vocabulary level too. With men, it's a lot of spatial reasoning. That's why you guys are great builders.
Hard to articulate ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's kind of like can be a problem, not a problem, but more of a heavy weight. If you're able to articulate yourself more, you're going to be able to talk about these emotions or think to yourself the emotions that are difficult for you.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important to recognize because it's very consistent. Like you might want to say that that's not something you can generalize, but like you said, data does show that those are some differences in just personalities and types of intelligence. It's not women being more intelligent than men, but that emotional intelligence is inherently higher in a woman than a man.
So if we were to go like into the behavioral health facilities that admit adults, do you think it's more men that are going into those? Because in a behavioral health facility, that's most likely like there was something that happened, right? Like maybe police were involved or some type of real crisis, and then they had to go there for a period of time. That's usually men.
So in my experience, I would say it's probably a nice balance. Because when you're talking about a behavioral health facility, you're talking about inpatient hospitalization, an emergency or crisis situation. And I will say I have worked with quite a bit of men in hospital settings. And it's because of those emergency or crises, the danger to self, the danger to others, substance abuse, right? Withdrawing from substances, psychosis or having a psychotic break due to a substance or a manic episode, right? And so, I do tend to see quite a bit of men in hospital settings. I have started seeing more men in the outpatient setting too, which is nice. Again, COVID really pushed people to start addressing their health more seriously.
Yeah. And, I always get a little weary about identifying as depressed. So how do you, is that something that you help people navigate and breaking from that label? Because it seems like that's something that can carry on and follow people their whole lives if they let it, right?
Absolutely. Some people can't even see their lives without being depressed, right? And so words are power. They have a lot of power. And what I like to do is I like to encourage people to reframe how they talk about themselves, right? So cognitive restructuring is a really big technique, right? We hear about it more and more and more. And it's more of, instead of saying I am depressed, it is I am experiencing depression. Right. So that this disconnect can happen. Right. And so that's kind of the sick part about going to therapy is that oftentimes people will walk in and they'll say, I'm sick. There's something really wrong with me. And I like to push people towards this is not your identity, right? Depression is not your identity. Just because you've experienced it for a long time doesn't mean this is who you are. It's a part of your identity. Right. And so there are situations that can contribute to higher levels of depression. Right. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with you. Everybody feels depressed. Right. Yeah. Everybody goes through episodes that are really, really hard and chaotic and scary. Right. But that doesn't mean that this is who you are forever.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so words are power, right? We can say things like, yes, I'm feeling sad right now. I'm feeling depressed. I'm also grateful that I have people that I can call.
Gratitude.
Right? Come on now.
Big factor there. I think that gratitude is probably where everybody should start. It helps with that awareness, helps put things into perspective. We like to compare to people that we think are doing better than us and then forget about the people that we're clearly doing better than. Yeah. And I don't like to have people compare down, but it's very natural for us to compare, right? So if you're going to, you have to weigh both sides of the balance there, right? Yeah. Compare yourself to yourself. Yeah. Identity is big and it takes a long time to really figure out what that is for somebody. And some people spend their whole lives trying to figure it out.
Come on now. Yeah. And then an article dropped saying The official age when you're considered middle age and having like the midlife crisis is now 35.
Oh,
yay! But yeah, like that was official. And
why is that? Do you know?
Well, people don't live until they're 100, right? Most people don't. The average person lives until they're probably about 60 to 70.
I think the new life expectancy is close to 80.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 35, 40 is halfway mark. So that's the midlife crisis.
Okay.
What do you think is a positive identity? Because sometimes people will say, I am depressed or I am something negative. Like in your perspective, what do you feel like I am should be followed by?
I think it should be followed by I am depressed and I'll survive. Right? I'll get through this. It's the using the and to continue that sentence instead of making it a hard period at the end of that sentence.
So do you think like a positive flip of that would be like I am resilient, or like if someone was trying to just kind of positively identify with maybe like affirmation words and things of that nature, like I am resilient, I am capable of going through these difficult situations. Yeah.
I think it's also important to reflect on the tough times that you have experienced and reminding yourself that I did get through it. Right?
Yeah.
So, I'm feeling depressed today. Also, I know I can overcome this. The things that I've done in the past have helped me before. I know it can help me again. Right?
Have you ever had any people tell you like, but you don't understand what I'm feeling?
Oh, yeah.
And then how do you deal with that? You know, someone trying to say like you couldn't connect or couldn't feel what I feel.
It really kind of depends. If I have a good rapport with this person, I'll be like, well, how do you know I don't know? You know, and we'll kind of explore that situation or that experience, because it turns into like, well, you don't know my life story, so you don't want to make assumptions.
Right.
Yeah. But it depends. Some people are open to having kind of that back and forth dialogue. And some folks aren't. Some folks will continue to view themselves as a victim. Right. And so they'll speak out of this victim mentality. Right?
Yeah.
The woe is me. You never understand. How can you help me? Right? And it's like, well, with those types of people, I'm like, well, you're here for a reason. You obviously want something to change. Right?
Yeah.
So even if I'm not that person that will get you there, this is a good place to take the first steps to figuring out where you want to be and how to get there. Yeah.
Show them the facts.
Yeah. Stay hopeful. Stay optimistic. Things can change, things can get better, but it's going to take work, you know?
Yeah. Hard work.
Hard work.
And like you mentioned earlier, in the spirit of like it being Black History Month, you know, people will talk about how there's a problem with movies that come out that only portray Black people as like slaves or some type of negative imagery. And it's interesting. It's just like an interesting dichotomy to me, to where it's like we do need to learn our history, but we have to flip it and frame it in a way that only provides us with like a positive energy to move forward with. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I just hope that, you know, in the spirit of Black History Month, like we figure out how to only extract the positive things from all those things that happen and not identify with like a slave or a people that came from slavery or anything like that. I think that's a challenge.
Yeah. One of many.
Honestly. There was a movie that recently dropped, and it was very much like it was a slave movie about slavery, and a lot of the comments about the movie where it was just a lot of negative comments, like stop complaining, right? You guys need to get over it. Slavery didn't even happen. And so I think there's a lot of patience that comes with being a Black person, a person of color, right? There's a lot of patience that goes into dealing with the negativity that, and also the backlash that's tied to Black History Month, right? You know, when's White History Month? When's this kind of History Month? And it's like, well, they exist. Yeah. They exist.
For sure.
It's just about doing your research, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because I've always felt this way, because I'll study a lot with how they talk about critical race theory in classes. And I've always felt like if I were able to form some type of curriculum that was to teach only the African American students about their history. I would mirror kind of what the European white history is. Like, it's great, the people they teach about, like the Thomas Jeffersons. They teach about these people who are resilient and like philosophic and all these different things. So I feel like the framework is there. It just needs to like be able to be more universal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I'm, from the school of thought that, our education in the future is going to be within our own hands. It's going to be like our own responsibility because we're going to all have these tools where we can learn what we want, when we want, and how in depth we want. And so the important part will be using discernment to decide what information you're going to believe, which can be hard without guidance and structure. But there's also a lot of projects in action where they are trying to make education more equal and distribute these resources better. So Russ knows that I'm a believer of abundance and a very bright, positive future. So, there's this doomsday mentality with AI and all these innovations that we have, but I just see a lot of potential. And one of that is being with mental health, because if you think of having a robot on your phone that's there for you to interact with when you're not feeling well, and it can, ring an alarm if you're in a crisis and things like that. And people get weary of that level of connection with technology, but I think we overlook a lot of areas where we're already like really close to that. Like how we interact with Siri and Alexa and these things that are just kind of second nature. And then as soon as those things can hold a conversation and, go back and forth with us and at least make us think that it understands us, then it's a very different situation, which could be powerful for people, because loneliness is very deadly. It's deadly,
It is.
And so if that's all that someone has to make them feel like they're not alone, then I think it's important for them to at least have that opportunity.
I think technology and mental health is just, we have to learn how to adjust, right? And again, going back to COVID, right? Going in office for therapy, or even, your own medical visits was something that was reduced, right? And even the access to a therapist, that was really challenging, because at the associate level, I wasn't able to do any virtual or telehealth sessions. Everybody had to come in office, right? And this is insurance and licensing, right? And all these protections. And, technology is really a solution to a lot of barriers in being able to treat your own mental health issues, or medical even. I know this, one of my buddies, he played football D1, was a ref, COVID hit, and all the games stopped. You guys remember that? Everything stopped. And so, he couldn't even go to the gym. So he relied on his phone to train him so that he could keep his, all of his endurance and stamina, everything up, so that when everything was back up and running, he was able to keep up with all the D1 football players as a 30-something-year-old. Yeah.
And even last week, I talked with a friend, Justin, of mine. He talked about how so many people did capitalize on the pandemic and use that downtime as an opportunity to kind of accelerate and really take care of themselves and find new solutions. And it was unfortunate that couldn't be the majority of the world. I think most of us got hit pretty hard and are still even healing from that. But it should also just remind us that there is always potential to take control.
Always.
And it just depends on what angle you're going to look at the situation from, right?
I wonder, just because like we've been talking about these things. So during the 2020 like COVID time, the George Floyd incident happened. A lot of people on social media started talking about how the police need to be like retrained to be able to deal with people who have mental health issues. Like, what was your perspective on that? And how do you think like a police officer should approach a large grown man who might be dealing with some type of mental health problems?
I think training is essential. I think if you are in a role where it's a helping role, right, where you have to directly work with people, having that type of training can be very useful, because it taps into that empathy that really can help de-escalate situations, right? And so, I used to do resiliency training with first responders a couple of years back. And most of it was focused on mental health 1-on-1 or 101, right? And just understanding basic facts, right? This is how somebody who's depressed, this is how it can look, right? So to you, you might see a big, angry guy, but in reality, this guy has been experiencing depression. He hasn't slept, right? He probably just got into an incident that was, he didn't mean to get into it, right? So he's feeling embarrassed, right? And so if we're capable of giving that person, identifying where they're at in their stage of escalation, right? Then we're better equipped to de-escalate them before something dangerous or unwanted happens, right? Yeah. So it's levels to it, but I anybody who wants training, I think should receive it. If you are in a direct role where you're working with folks, you should have some type of mental health training.
Yeah, you've mentioned sleep more than once.
Explain
to our audience the importance of sleep and mental health.
Get to sleep. Sleep is essential for everything. Everything.
Yes.
I mean, it helps with recovery. It helps your brain heal itself. It helps your body heal itself. Oftentimes, that's the number one sign that something's going on is when your sleep's impacted, right? And this can be things like having difficulties falling asleep, staying asleep, frequently waking up, nightmares, right? Lucid dreams, things as such. And then like the severe cases where we're seeing like sleepwalking or narcolepsy, right? But, you know, if you're capable of getting between 6, I would say 6 is minimum, really 7. I like 7 as my minimum for sleep and 8 to 9 maximum for sleep, then you're golden. Right? You're golden. But I would say if your stress levels are higher than normal, check in with your sleep. If that's off, talk to your doctor, especially if what you're doing isn't enough.
Yeah. And, you know, just like with everything, we can all function off of different levels of sleep, but there's certainly a minimum. So I would agree that 6 is probably the minimum that anybody should be allowing on a consistent basis. And having the routine and the normal bedtime and the normal wake time and proper sleep hygiene is very important. So there's a lot of factors that go into play, and there's a lot of solutions that people can explore to have better quality of sleep. And I always try to help people at least explore all those other solutions before they do things like take Ambien and all of these like really heavy medications that will knock you out, but also have these other side effects that
creates dependency.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
So what I think sleep is the leading symptom of mental illness, right? And it can exacerbate things greatly.
Absolutely.
It can cause these breaks that you've talked about. I have a friend that experienced that actually, and
really?
Just you know, there were things going on in his life, right? So he wasn't able to sleep just simply because of that. You know, day 3 or 4 really has like a break and a scary episode.
Of course.
You know, unfortunately, when things like that happen, it's already hard enough for the individual, but people start to treat you differently, and it can be very hard to bounce back from those situations. So it can be pretty in depth, and I think that, you know, what you do is important, and people need to explore these options a lot more, because I always talk about how I never explored these options and got the help that I needed. So I'm very grateful that I'm here today in the state that I'm in. But, you know, you don't have to do it alone, and you really shouldn't do it alone. I don't think there's many things that we should do alone except like explore our own consciousness and try to be more self-aware. All these battles that we're fighting, there's teams available for us to build and fight through together, right?
We all have a story. We all have a story. We all have traumas, whether it's, I always talk about the little T's and the big T's, right? Some of us have a lot of little T's, some of us have a lot of big T's. Right? And so it's all about, what do you want to do with what you know and what you have, right? Do you want to carry all of this stuff and let it weigh you down and slow you down? Or do you want to, you know, like envision that big heavy bag of stuff?
Ooh, I just picture Jesus. You talk about big T's, little T's. I'm thinking of the cross, Jesus carrying the cross.
Oh yeah, hello.
Right.
Hallelujah.
That's a little T, but it's big and heavy.
Come on now.
And it represents the suffering.
It really does. It does. And I thank God every time we have these opportunities, and I can just have the awareness of drawing these correlations, because I love that you put it that way. We talk about not comparing traumas, but big T's and little T's is a really good way to put it.
Yeah. And since you bring that up, I wonder what you think about, because there will be a lot of people who, when they enter like a manic state, they will have feelings like they're a prophet, right? You hear people say that, like, oh, I'm Moses or I'm Jesus, in these states where they're manic.
Sure.
Like, what is that? Like, I've never understood that kind of like grandiose, like prophetic ideas.
So one part of it is grandiosity, and then there's the other part of psychosis. So psychosis is two things. There's hallucinations and delusions, right? So hallucinations are disruptions in your senses, right? The five senses. And delusions are false beliefs, right? So I am Moses is a false belief. So that is a delusional thought. And then when we say things like, I am Moses and I'm invincible and I can do what I want, that's that grandiosity, right? This thought that you are invincible, right? You can do anything that you want with no repercussions, right? Yeah. And so that's all mood related, right? And that deals with your brain chemistry, that deals with your biology, your physiology, all the stuff that's internal. And oftentimes the intervention is going to be medication management, especially when we're talking about mania or psychotic breaks.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's fascinating to me too. Yeah.
I've never understood that, and it makes complete sense, because if you start to feel like you were invincible, you're not mortal, all these things that are just completely not realistic. Yeah. Now you've entered that grandiosity. That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. And if you throw trauma into it, right, there can be this dissociation that's happening. Right. So there's this disconnect from reality. Yeah. Right. Which dissociation is typically a response to trauma. Yeah. Right. And so when we think of like childhood trauma, if there's any type of, let's say the caregivers in the home are having domestic violence or they're arguing, right? Oftentimes the child will dissociate or disconnect and go to an imaginary world that's safe, right? And these are ways to keep their mind safe, right? And then as we get older, if we have bipolar condition, or maybe we have a mood disorder that's untreated, right? We have 3 to 4 days of poor sleep, right? 2 hours maximum of sleep, right? And we're having work-related issues. These are all things that can snowball into something that's bigger, right? Into having a big manic episode with psychotic features.
So that's similar to like the kid who goes into a different place to disassociate from their problems when they're younger. As they get older, you're saying that that can look like them entering into a manic state?
Not necessarily. Okay. What tends to happen is the things that we've done when we were kids, right, to help soothe ourselves or help make ourselves feel safe, we tend to continue those coping skills or defense mechanisms as an adult, right? So the dissociation as a kiddo, as an adult, it can look like me just being on autopilot at work, right? And then if I'm not getting the sleep and I'm having a manic episode, I'm really disconnected. Okay. Right? Yeah, I'm having a tough time grounding myself to reality. Yeah. It's love mental health.
Yeah. And now it's so easy to be disconnected from reality because all the virtual, we're in our phones and there's so many distractions readily available that it's pretty simple to ignore the problems in your life and kind of cover things up and act like they're not a big deal. And it's very I think it's second nature to lose your awareness at this point when we get consumed with these devices that we have. So how often do you see addiction play a role into people's like depression and their other mental issues?
Often. Often. I mean, COVID, I think, really did a number on folks and their addiction. So around that time, folks that had been struggling with an addiction issue, we saw their symptoms exacerbating. We saw a big jump in numbers with people just struggling with substance abuse. And then those that didn't have a history of substance abuse, if they lost their job, if they lost a loved one due to COVID, right? If they were restricted in doing things, oftentimes they were engaging in substance use to self-medicate or deal with stress, right? And things like alcohol use, right? That is socially acceptable. Right? But then you have to think about other things too, like caffeine use, right? Nicotine use, marijuana use, right? These are all things that are socially acceptable and legal, but they are being abused, right? Yeah. So, addiction plays a big role on mental health and medical, physical wellness too.